Ohayo gozaimasu minasan. Boku wa Giovanni Bravo desu. O genki desu ka? Yoroshiku ne onegai shimasu. We have a brief background about Japan. The first era of the recorded history in Japan is the Kofun, after that 255 to 138, which was characterized by large burial mounds or tumuli. The Kofun were headed by a class of aristocratic warlords. They adopted many Chinese customs and innovations. Buddhism came to Japan during the Asuka period 538 to 710, as did the Chinese writing system. At this time, society was divided into clans. The first strong central government developed during the Nara period to 710 to 794. The aristocratic class practiced Buddhism and Chinese calligraphy, while agricultural villagers followed Shintoism. Japan's unique culture could develop rapidly during the Heian era, 794 to 108 BC. The imperial court turned out enduring art, poetry, and prose. The samurai warrior class developed at this time as well. Samurai lords called shogun and ruled Japan in the name of the emperor until 1868. The Kamakura shogunate, 185 to 138 BC, ruled over Japan from Kyoto. Aided by two miraculous methods, the Kamakura repelled attacks by Mongol armadas in 1274 and 1281. A particularly strong emperor, Go-Daigo, timed to overthrow the shogunate in 131 BC, resulting in a civil war between competing northern and southern courts that finally ended in 1392. During this time, a class of strong regional lords called daimyo increased in power, ruled lasted through the end of the Edo period, also known as the Tokugawa shogunate. That year, a new constitutional monarchy was established, headed by the Meiji Emperor. The power of the shoguns came to an end. That's a brief background of Japan. So, we are moving forward to the language of the Japanese. Iguso. Japanese language is essentially spoken only in Japan. It is an Altic language and its nearest relative in Korean. It is not related to Chinese, but writing was learned from China. Chinese characters, kanji, each with a meaning and multiple pronunciations as a part of writing system. Japanese words are composed of many syllables and endings are attached to change. Tense form of negative, other words, modes, mostly meaning. The standard sentence order is subject, object, and verb. English language education in Japan, transition and challenges. Introduction. English language education is a highly controversial issue in Japan. Some claim that the Japanese education system had been recognized as one of the most successful ones in the world. With the exception of its English language and curriculum, English language education in public schools had been specifically and constantly criticized by its failure in communicative language acquisition. Some point of the Japanese high school graduates cannot even carry on a simple daily conversation in English. After 6 years of learning English in school, others warn that the average TOEFL score for Japanese is one of the longest among countries in Asia. They all place the blame on English language education in schools. In 2002, the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science and Technology, or the MEXT, made an assertion in its official report that it is essential that our children acquire communication skills in English. And in the following year, in 2003, it announced an action plan to cultivate Japanese with English abilities. We move forward to the history of language education. English language education as a system started in 1854, when Japan conducted the Treaty of Peace and Amity with the United States and opened its doors to the West. Since then, the purpose of English language education has changed to the country itself has changed politically, socially, and economically. As Fujimoto Adamson of 2006 has argued that the tracing of the influences in general English language education in the past would lead us to an understanding. It is essential to have knowledge on these changes, especially the transitions of English language education during the last four eras, the Meiji, Taisho, Showa, and Heishi eras.
Ohayou gozaimasu everyone, I am Mari Color, your presenter for today. And now, let's talk about the Japanese language policy in the context of Japan. The Constitution of Japan was enacted under American occupation after World War II, and in consideration of past Japanese imperialism, it proclaims the internal renunciation of war. However, the original ideal, pacificism, has been disintegrating in response to American policies. Because of Korean War and the Cold War, the US is said to have changed its policy toward Japan from preventing it from having armed to positioning its an ally fighting against communism. As a result, the Japan Self-Defense Forces were established, which are being dispatched to Iraq at the request of the US. Another primary principle of the Constitution is respect for basic human rights. However, this principle of the Japanese Constitution is not at all grasped in terms of the right of minorities, especially in view of recent changes in notions of human rights, such as the right to know, the right to self-determination, and environmental rights due to martial law, that the Japanese community needs to follow rules that was being mandated by the Japanese politicians. But because of the given flows of American in policy implementation, people's memory of Japanese imperialism has protected to the Constitution for over a half-century from any amendment. Thus, the starting point of an equitable language policy should be placed here, at the intersection of oppositions to any kind of imperialism and respect for human rights. Japan is sometimes misconceived as a homogeneous country, even by the politicians. While what are those controversial issues in implementing the English language in the Japanese education? Although the quality of English language education in school has been blamed as the main cause for the failure to cultivate students' communication skills in English, the following issues has also been raised as possible causes for such shortcomings. The first one is the purpose of learning English. The acquisition of communication skills is one of the most important purposes of learning English in Japan nowadays. However, this hasn't always been the case. But the case is communicative English skills were not necessarily the means to achieve success in Japanese society, because you can grab any opportunities to make Japanese individuals be successful. Only prestigious universities was seen as the key to success, and therefore, passing the entrance examination was the main reason to study English. As a result, reading and writing skills were prioritized over communicative English skills by both students and teachers. The second one is the class size and the traditional teaching style. The traditional teaching style was teacher-centered and involved lecture-style instruction, which is considered less effective for the cultivation of communicating skills. Teachers are more on writing skills, as English was being the new added policy in Japanese policy. One of the reasons for the dominance of such a teaching style was the large number of students, more than 40 students in one class. English was the crucial means to pass entrance examinations, so students were trained to read and write relying on grammatical sizes and translation to and from Japanese as the primary methods, wherein students have no opportunities to engage in discussion, express opinions, or engage in group problem solving due on the unskilled in using English language by means of communication. Although English language teaching in Japan is being improved, as many teachers are striving to adopt communicative method in teaching styles to foster the development of their students' communicative abilities. There are also many teachers who tend to apply traditional method to involve translation from English to Japanese and place stress on grammars, like the language policy under 1987 Constitution of Bilingual Policy Education, wherein teachers use two languages to deliver the lessons and for the students express their opinions, especially in grades 1 to 2, that is fluently develop their native language and gradually embraces new languages. One is the teaching abilities of English language teachers. In their part, developing the strategic plan to cultivate Japanese with English abilities. MEXT in 2000 pointed out 5 key policy to foster English abilities. The first one is boosting the motivation of learners. Second one is improving educational content. The third one is improving the qualification of English language instructions and upgrading the teaching system. And the last one is enhancing English conversion activities in elementary schools. To the Japanese, education has always had important goals in addition to acquisition of academic knowledge. intellectual growth, or vocational skills. Moral education, character development are also among the central concerns. In order to make it possible, Japanese Council wants not to be ignorant in using the English language once they communicate to other countries. Thus, we all know that Japanese want to improve more Nihongo as their second language, but in that way, they will be immersed in English language.
The two countries, Japan and Philippines, give education a very special part in their society and in the lives of every person. One of the most important things is their education, especially in their character development, and that's the most common similarity of the both countries. Both countries have the same goal of organizing curriculum, which is to attain the educational goals of local schools. In their education system, subjects taught from primary education to secondary education are math, science, social sciences, music and arts, health, and physical education. Both countries have the same years spent in primary education, while in their languages or the language policy, both countries have minority languages and indigenous languages. Both countries were occupied by America and brought English into these islands. English classes are in elementary schools are held by the homeroom teachers. Let's go for the main topic wherein the comparison of Japan and Philippines, their language policies, and the education system. First, let's go to the education system wherein in Japan, the institution is Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science and Technology, or also known as MEXT, MEXT. While in the Philippines, we have the DepEd, Department of Education, Commission on Higher Education, CHED, and Technical Education and Skills Development Authority, or the TESDA. In Japan, kindergarten starts at 3 years old, while in the Philippines, children starts at 5 years old. They spend in the school for 240 days in Japan, while 200 days here in the Philippines. During feudal period in Japan, there were private educational institutions, while during the pre-Hispanic period here in the Philippines, the education system was unstructured and informal. Japan is known for the highest literacy rates in the world, and their required subjects are Japanese, social studies, math, science, music, arts, PE, and health, while the major subjects here in the Philippines are math, science, English, Filipino, and social sciences. Japanese schools start at April and end in March, while in the Philippines, classes start at June and end in March. Most Japanese schools run into 3 semesters, while DepEd states that the Philippine system was divided into 4 quarters in the year 2014. There were a total of 9 years in the compulsory education in Japan, wherein 6 years in elementary, 3 years for junior high school, and another 3 years for high school. While in the Philippines, we have a total of 12 years, wherein 6 years in elementary, 4 years in junior high school, and another 2 years for senior high school. The class size in the Japan education system was 38 up to 45 students, while in the Philippines, a minimum of 15 students and a maximum of 65 students in just one classroom. Now, let's move on to the language policies of the both countries. The first policy is from the Constitution of Japan, Articles 26. All people shall have the right to receive an equal education correspondent to their ability as provided by law. All people shall be obligated to have all boys and girls under their protection receive ordinary education as provided for by law. Such compulsory education shall be free, and it has almost the same policy in the Philippines, wherein in the Constitution of the Philippines, year 1987, Article 14, wherein education, science and technology, arts, culture, sports, and education states that it protects and promotes the rights of Filipino citizens to all quality education. For the next one is the action plan to cultivate Japanese with English abilities in the year 2003, wherein next clearly and specifically stated its aim to improve the national standard of English language education. For the next policy, Part 2, Trends and Developments in Cultural Policies, Chapter 8, Measures for Cultural Promotion, Section number 3, Japanese Language Policies in Accordance with the Times, Number 1, Development of Japanese Language Policy, wherein, amidst the promotion of Japanese language policy, the deliberations of the National Language Council, which is comprised of people of experience in academic standing and experts, have mainly concerned of the orthographic notation system. Another policy under this Part 2 Trends and Development in Cultural Policies, Number 2, Japanese Language Dissemination and Education. The Agency for Cultural Affairs has produced a series of videotapes that employs audio and visual effects to teach and disseminate to Japanese language. The series is titled Utsukushiku Itaka na Kotoba wo Mezashite, or Towards the Beautiful and Rich Japanese Language. It serves to stimulate thought about language by including simple explanations of various language issues. For our next policy, Course of Study for Lower Secondary Schools by next year 2003 states that for compulsory foreign language instruction, English should be selected in principle, wherein in the Philippines, there is this policy regarding the use of English language as a medium of instruction in the educational system around nationwide. Next policy or guidelines. Next guidelines, the course of study, national standards for school curricula. MEX closely supervises the curricula and textbooks of public elementary, junior, high school, senior high schools. Therefore, the contents of the classes are very similar throughout the country. As a result, this standard of education can be maintained. For our next policy, Provisional Administrative Reform Council report released in December 1991, wherein the idea of introducing official English language instruction into elementary schools was first proposed. Next policy is the developing a strategic plan to cultivate Japanese with English abilities and by next year 2002, wherein it pointed out 5 key policies to foster English abilities. First is the boosting the motivation of learners. Second, improving educational content. Third, improving the qualifications of English language instructors and upgrading the teaching systems. Fourth is the enhancing English conversation activities in elementary schools. And fifth, the strengthening mother tongue or Japanese language acquisition. The next policy, wherein English again came to be considered a tool for practical communication for some and was adopted as a subject in the educational reforms of 1947, wherein it became a de facto requirement for students in order to enter high school. While in the Philippines, the English language was used as a medium of instruction mandated by the law under DepEd Memorandum Number 81 Series of 2003, wherein English language should be used as a medium of instruction. Our next is the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program or the JET program, wherein it started in the year 1987, wherein the government hired foreign nationals as language instructors for junior and senior high schools, including the local staff, to improve foreign language acquisition. They were called assistant language teachers, or also known as ALTs. While in the Philippines, we don't need foreign language teachers because we focus in producing language teachers, and we are known, or the Philippines are well known in English language teaching and learning. For our next is foreign language finally became an officially required subject in junior high school in the year 1998, which ended the discussion more than 1 century old regarding pros and cons of requiring a foreign language in the compulsory education system. Entrance examinations are currently being reviewed by some universities to solve technical issues of introducing the listening comprehension part in the near future. Introduction of a listening component is expected to send a message to high schools to give more emphasis to the communicative aspect of language learning. While in the Philippines, an executive order was signed by the former President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo stating the establishment of the policy to strengthen the use of the English language as a medium of instruction. The title, or it is known as the Executive Order number 210 series of 2003. For our last policy or law, Ainu Bunka Shinko-ho, or the Ainu Culture Promotion Law of 1997, wherein discrimination assimilation policy. Under this states that the indigenous people are on the verge of losing their languages, cultures, and identities. It has also almost the same policy in the Philippines, wherein it is known as the Dex Order number 11 series of 1987.
Aside from communication and understanding, language serve other important purposes. In Japan, these significant roles are portrayed on the screening process in the field of education, job searches, and company promotions. Though the language policy is not at its finest as of the moment, there have been suggestions on revisions of the policies that will serve its original purpose, which is to promote linguistic and cultural policies rather than obstructing them. The strength of their language policy is that it is intended to countermeasure against imperialism, though one of its weaknesses is that writing in English or any other language for that matter can be seen as a form of resistance, as others view it as replacing their culture and tradition. Another thing is that the English language is taught in schools for the purpose of entrance examinations. It focused more on memorization and translation of the language to Japanese. They do not pay attention to the fundamental elements of the language, and they do not use it for communication. English language curriculum is actually one of the significant challenges Japan must address. There are a lot of issues that has to be dealt with, so here are a few suggestions to resolve these issues. The first is the implementation of small-sized classes. It is believed that the number of learners in the classroom affects the information and knowledge that each person is learning. So reducing the number of students in each class could be a possible solution, since it will be easier for the teacher to deal with individual difficulties of each student in a small-sized classes compared to the large-sized ones. It will also provide more time for the teacher to specifically cultivate each learner's language skills. The second is the upgrading of the teaching abilities of English language teachers. Most language teachers in Japan were trained under the traditional teaching style. As I mentioned on the weaknesses, they focused on memorization and translation, and therefore they did not have a strong background in communicative language teaching. The teaching system should be more flexible and open to change. The last one is the use of assistant language teachers. In this, the assistant language teachers did not have to hone their teaching experience as part of their qualifications. They just need to have something that is to be needed in language learning, which is a communicative language background. They can be someone who is a native speaker of the language, or just someone who speaks the language fluently in the communicative level.
The widespread belief that only one language is spoken in Japan is complicated by the diversity of other languages spoken inside the archipelago's borders, a diversity that has long been neglected, denied, or unrealized. Language has functioned on many levels to include and exclude, to reinforce and enforce national identity, and to mediate personal identity in a variety of ways. Japan has a rich and colorful linguistic fabric, the presence of established ethnic communities, overseas students, scholars, and business. We are beginning to see a recognition that Japan has become a multicultural society through both and specifics of its history and effects of globalization. The issue now is, where do we go next? The various groups of the population mentioned above have particular language demands that must be handled, such as the education of children of migrants, both legal and illegal, and the provision of language Japanese lessons for their parents.